Hi guys, as promised, we're gonna continue with yesterday's workshop. Um, I think we did talk about double subject. Yes, we did. And I was gonna continue with verb tenses. The thing with verb tenses is that this is the thing. You have to be very clear about what you're writing in one particular sentence. Like in a particular sentence, you're writing about the literary text, the characters, what they say, what they think, what they go through, etc., etc. You use present tense. But when you switch to the historical context and you talked about the Victorians and the attitudes they had, or the obstacles they faced, etc., then you switch to past tense, the simple past. So this I just noticed that this quote here has nothing to do with verb tenses. I don't know why it's there. So I'm just gonna erase it there. Um, but I need to make, I mean, I need to make this clear. In your outlines, in every particular case, I pointed out what the problems are for each one of you in case you're having trouble with this. VT means verb tense. I mean verb tense. But that's the rule. Okay. When you um analyze a literary text, use present tense. When you describe the historical context, use past tense. Okay. Now, the thing with possessive, this one, I think it's simply because many of you guys, and I say many because I see this in many of your works, is that you don't pay attention. Okay. You don't pay attention to what you're writing. Another point of view is local animals perspective. If you notice, this is one animal with a possessive. So it's a point of view of a local animal's perspective. That's a problem. Tavi is a menace in the couple of cobras perspective. One cobra, but it says couple of cobra. Is it cobras? Cobras? So where you place the apostrophe and the S matters. Through Scrooge, Dickens shows how the wealthy middle classes indifference. Now, here the possessive is not wrong, but these use of possessive is kind of weird. It like because you have not a person or not one single entity that you can use the possessive with, but it's more like an abstract idea. So it's tricky with abstract ideas to use possessive S. Rather, you should say something like this. Dickens shows how the indifference of the wealthy middle class, okay? How the indifference of the wealthy middle class, okay? In these cases, where it's not really a person, like a real person or character or being, to use the word being, that you can identify like more concretely, rather use the preposition of and turn around the terms of the construct. So perpetrates poverty by ignoring, etc., etc. Look at this other example. Mr. Bloomfield blamed Agnes for his children's behavior. Here you have a apostrophe S. Oh, see? Happens to me too. Gotta correct it. Okay. Not an accent mark. It's an apostrophe. Children's behavior. You cannot say children behavior for his children's behavior. Okay. Mr. Bloomfield blame here. Well, I'm gonna take advantage of the opportunity and change this to present tense because we're analyzing the literary text. Mr. Bloomfield blames Agnes for his children's behavior. Well, and we already talked about the introduction of quotes here. There's nothing there. You need to see if a colon works or rather a proper introduction of the quote. I don't know if it's he or she. I haven't even read it. And it's very strange that when you have the care of them, you've no better control over them than that. Yeah, that's him. That's him talking. There are, I'm gonna upstairs, there are nasty snow feet. go after them and see them and these and et cetera, et cetera. And the period at the end. Okay, so yeah, this was about the possessive here, but I think it serves the purpose of talking about the verb tense and the introduction of the proper introduction of quotes. I want to use a different color here. I'm gonna use a different color. Yeah, whatever. This was fine. Okay. Now the thing, the definite article the. I know this is very tricky because I remember when I was learning English and I was an advanced student, I still struggled with this. And many of you do too. Not many, some of you. Just pay attention. I marked it. I marked it everywhere I could where you're supposed to use the and you're not using it, and when you're using it and you're not supposed to, which is the last cases. Mostly it's when you're supposed to use the definite article the, and you're not using it. So pay attention to that. With relative pronouns, as I explained in class, do not omit them in formal writing. It's not a grammatical mistake, but it is not proper style in formal writing. Another thing is that sometimes you get confused with which, in which, where. Remember that which always has a comma before, and it's for non-restrictive relative clauses. And you don't use a comma for restrictive relative clauses. So I'm already talking about what it says here, the punctuation of relative clauses. When do I use a comma? When do I not use a comma? It has to do with the nature of the relative clause, if it's restrictive or it's non-restrictive. You need to know this, guys. Your senior students about to graduate, you need to know this. If you didn't learn it yet, you're gonna have to learn it to do your work better. I mean, this is basic syntax that some of you are still struggling with. So please pay attention to this. Another thing is that sometimes you use where when it's not really a place. So for example, the Victorian society where women struggled immensely, for their role. Where works for places. Society is not a place. Okay? So don't use where. You have to use in which. It's Victorian society, in which or for which, or if you need a preposition, that's fine, but it's not where. Be careful not to use where when you're not talking about a place. Good. Now, with organization and content, I think this was a problem in most outlines. And I blame myself. Maybe I wasn't clear enough when I explained this last semester, or I should have, insist more upon this semester. But the thing is that thesis statements are wonderful. You already nailed them. Like you got the controlling ideas 1, 2, and 3, and then I go on the outline 1, 2, and 3. They correspond, and you're gonna see the little 1s and 2s and 3s in a circle. That's my way of showing or following the organization of your outline according to the TS. The thesis statement, and also to show you that what I saw in case you haven't seen it. I do this in blue. But the thing is that every topic sentence for every paragraph should work as a mini thesis statement. That is that every topic sentence should also have a couple of controlling ideas that organize A and B. Okay? So, in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Stevenson also illustrates the repression of desires from people with respectable behavior. In The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Stevenson also illustrates the repression of desires from people with respectable behavior. The repression of desires in this TS refers to one of the controlling ideas in the thesis statement. But there is no information as to what is A and what is B and how the paragraph is going to be organized. Every paragraph is a mini essay. Every topic sentence is a mini thesis statement. that should also have a couple of controlling ideas. This one doesn't have any. Finally, the novella embodies double morality. That's the controlling idea that comes from the thesis statement in Victorian society through the lens of hypocrisy and the consequences of it. That's very good because then, oh, I think that the first part of this paragraph is going to be about hypocrisy. And the second part of the paragraph is going to be about the consequences of hypocrisy. So chances are I already have A and B in this topic sentence, which would work, as I said, as a mini thesis statement. I hope this is clear because this works for everybody. I mean, not almost, but most of you failed in this part sometimes or all the time. One thing is that in thesis statements, I'd also find in a couple cases, like if repetitions of words that could be avoided. I know that I've said that repetition of keywords and key phrases is important. You need to use it. And repetition of non-important words or unnecessary words, you should avoid. I think that's clear. But sometimes even the repetition of keywords or terms can be avoided without, especially if they're very close, like in the same sentence, okay? Look at this. Lisbeth, and the comma should be inside. In English, the comma goes inside the quotation marks. The punctuation goes inside, especially commas and periods. By Rudyard Kipling, illustrates the role of women in Victorian society through Lisbeth's. I know that the first Lisbeth is the title of the story, and the second Lisbeth is the character. They're two different, but when you read and you have Lisbeth and Lisbeth, too close, it sounds kind of funny. So, oh, that wasn't what I meant to do. I know that some of you are already guessing what I'm going to do. Through the protagonist's experiences with conjugal commitments, social paradigms, and romantic connections. See? So you can avoid hearing Lisbeth twice in the same sentence. To sum up, and this is another example, to sum up, in Stevenson's novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the author, you don't need this. To sum up, in Stevenson's novella, The Strange Case of Dr. and Mr. Hyde, the author illustrates, but you saying the author, but you already identified the author. So you don't need to do it twice, okay? And this happens not only in thesis statements, but also in topic sentences. Watch out. To sum up, in Stevenson's novella, The Strange Case of Dr. and Mr. Hyde, the author illustrates. This is not wrong, per se, but it can be improved, okay? One thing is, you eliminate this, one form is this, right? And then here you write Stevenson to identify them, identify him better. To sum up, in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, comma, I'm missing a comma here, that should not be in italics. That happens a lot of times. Like the italics are for the title, not for the punctuation that follows it. So get rid of the italics, comma. Stevenson illustrates how the struggle among duality, societal expectations, etc., etc. Okay, good. Now, and we're almost done. The thing with the author versus the name, I noticed that many of you use the author this, the author that. If you already established who the author is in the introduction, which you will do, it sounds kind of weird to hear in the essay to start hearing the author, because it kind of, like in the introduction, you introduce the author, the name of the author. It's like you bring the reader close to the identity of this person. And then when you say the author, you separate the reader from the identity of that person. Like it's like contradicting yourself a little bit. Here's the author, his name is Stevenson, and he wrote this, this, and that. And then I say the author this, the author that. The reader's like, yeah, but we already know the author. Why not call him by his name? Okay. So it's a good idea to use the name of the author, especially the last name of the author. And when I say last, I mean the last. If the author has 3 names, like Robert Louis Stevenson, that Stevenson is the last name. Okay. And instead of using the name, actually, sometimes we use the author when we don't want to identify him or her, when we don't know him, or in other instances. But in this particular case, we're not separating the reader. We're not trying to separate the reader from the author of the text. So better to use the name of the author. Okay. And finally, some of you get a little confused about, should I use the title of the novel every time? Should I say the novel, the work, the text, the short story, etc., etc. This is very difficult to explain and very difficult to correct, like in a general statement for every one of you. I'm just gonna ask you, please pay attention to my corrections on your outline about this thing, because in each particular case, I'm trying to guide you as to what is better, to say the work, to say to say the novel, or to say the title of a novel. Usually the work, the text do not go well, because it's very vague. Like the work, it's any work. The text is just a text. But the analysis is about a very specific literary work or a very specific literary text that has a title. Similar to what I just said about the author, right? You bring the reader closer to the novel in the introduction by introducing the title of the novel. And then in the other paragraphs, you say the text and you say the work. It sounds like it is like you're separating again the reader from the identity of the literary text you're working on. Now, the novel tends to work good when you don't want to repeat the text again, or you could say Stevenson's novella, or Bronte's novel, if you don't want to repeat the title. It doesn't work so well with the short story. In general terms, it's better to use a title. If you feel you're repeating it too much, you could also simplify it a little bit. Like you could do this. To sum up, in the strange case, but you still use the italics, so the reader understands that this is a simplified version of the novel. Always favor the full time of the novel. But if you feel like you're using it too much, too closely, you could opt for simplify it a little bit. But it should never be your first option. That's what I'm saying. Okay, I'm sorry. I think this last part wasn't really clear, but it's very difficult, as I said, to just give you a guideline that works for everyone. So please pay attention to my corrections on your own. Finally, before I finish this video, you have to add an introduction and a conclusion to your paper. So let me just remind you what an introduction and a conclusion do. The introduction brings the reader from his or her real world into your paper and what you're trying to convince the reader of. So you start from the general to the specific. You don't go too general, right? We've talked about this. Last semester, we talked about this extensively. But you don't go too general, but you can talk about Victorian issues, Victorian problems, interests, concerns of the time, the role of women, et cetera, whatever your main topic is, like your umbrella topic is. You need to develop that for a couple of sentences, 2 or 3 sentences, and then you start to introduce the novel, the story. You can introduce the author and the novel and the title, sorry, of the story of the novella of the novel. And then you could also dig a little bit there, like kind of introduce what happens there without describing the plot, like without telling me the story or the novel again, but maybe you mention some of the characters and that they struggle and that or that they represent the fight between good and evil, like in general terms. And then you end the introduction with your thesis statement. Remember to adjust the thesis statement from what you already wrote for the outline so that it fits the introduction, okay? It needs to be adjusted. And with the conclusion, you do the opposite. You start with the concluding sentence, which is already a restatement of the thesis statement. So that's a specific. and then you move out a little bit, kind of like to lead the reader out of your essay into into his real world. And you can rephrase, you can do a summary, you can work with a summary and of every paragraph, every body paragraph, and the main arguments that you discussed. So in that sense, you go back to your outline and you can use that and rephrase that and use different words and kind of remind the reader what you already told him. And you finish with a more general statement about the situation of RIA. I mean, the how significant this is, how important to know this is for the reader, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how you come out come out of your essay in a conclusion. Okay, I hope this helps. Remember, I'll be available on my cell phone, and I'll be available next Friday from 8 to I think 11:30. And if you want to come and work there or finish up, final details of your essay with my assistants, I'll be there. And the following Friday, we'll have our creative response projects being presented. So work on that. Ask me questions about that if you need to. And also I'm thinking that throughout these next couple of weeks, we can get, kind of talk about it. We can do something nice at the end. I could bring something to eat and share together, but we could do that on our WhatsApp group and agree on who's bringing what. But that's not for next Friday, but for the last one. Okay. And I think that's it. Bye-bye. See you.